In today's lesson, we're going to look at the problems of rapid urbanisation, focusing largely on developing and emerging countries. This is part of the Edexcel IGCSE Spec 6.1 Section C, which I've highlighted here. So one of the most obvious issues that we get when we have a huge increase in population, lots of people migrating to a city, is housing becomes an issue. So we get often not enough housing because the amount of people can't be met and the demand can't be met. So you get the growth of places like this, which are shanty towns. These are informal settlements that kind of crop up, and it's to try and meet the demand for all that housing. In some places we call them slums. In South America we would call them favelas. These are often places that pop up on kind of fringe land, so maybe on steep slopes or kind of next to kind of motorways, the kind of places where we wouldn't normally build housing because it could be unsuitable in some way. It might be, next to places of really high pollution. The actual land might not be good enough to stabilise housing, and because the demand's so high, you often get these kind of temporary informal settlements building up. Because these are kind of makeshift kind of housing, you often get them made out of kind of salvaged material. So we can see in the top right here, most of the houses are made out of corrugated iron. Scrap wood is often used, plastic. Therefore, these houses aren't normally of the best quality. They're cheaply built. Often the people who live in them are very poor, so they can't afford necessarily better materials, and therefore so the housing is often in unsuitable areas. It's made cheaply. They're densely packed next to each other, so if there's any kind of diseases, that will spread really, really quickly between them. Equally, if there was a fire, that would also destroy lots of these houses quite quickly because they're so close together. As I said before, these are informal settlements, so these are not sanctioned by the government. That means the government often turns a blind eye to this, but essentially at endpoint, because it's on land that's not legally theirs, they can actually be destroyed by the government at any time. Also in this other picture, because they're on this kind of fringe land, they can be subject to big problems. They're poorly built. If it's on a steep land, a bit of land like this collection of slums is, it could be prone to landslides. So there is the kind of suggestion that these kind of housing that kind of pops up can be got rid of either by human consequences or natural consequences quite easily. The other end of the scale is that housing can actually go up in price. So if you look at these top 4 cities, these are huge mega cities where there is lots of people going in. There's rapid urbanisation happening, and the price house has, in Beijing, is 40 times higher than what people can normally afford. That shows you that when there's a high demand, that can sometimes push the prices up, especially in these huge mega cities. Outside of housing, here's some obvious pictures to show kind of waste issues. When we don't have enough sanitation, so enough sewers, then often people just dump their waste into the rivers, often find this in slums and shanty towns. And so that increase in people often leads to kind of our water sources being polluted. It's not just kind of domestic waste that goes in there. Obviously, as a city grows and industries start to grow, especially secondary industries, then they can actually, if it's unregulated, dump waste into the river. So we can see that waste being put into kind of, especially rivers, is a big issue when there's huge urbanisation. Similarly, we just looked at kind of how our water sources might get polluted. Well, as a population increases, we might not have enough running water to go into homes, so people will often have to go to these untreated sources to go water. It might have to go to standpipes, or they might be getting them straight from rivers. Therefore, the water here isn't going to be the best quality, especially if we know that kind of waste is being put in it, which means that some people are going to be drinking water which is prone to cause them diseases, and therefore people will get pretty sick from it. Similarly, in terms of electricity, as these settlements grow really, really quickly, not everybody will have access to electricity. So there's two ways that they will get around this. In some slums, they will kind of tap into official sources to try and steal electricity, which could obviously lead to dangerous things like it's not done professionally and therefore it could cause fires. But also people might not even have that, so they might have to rely on using kind of cooking and wood and coal in their kind of shacks, and therefore they're having to use it for cooking and lighting, which again, that's a lot of pollution being pumped in these small spaces, so it could cause people to have various diseases, kind of like causing lung cancer and various other kind of problems. When we get lots more people moving into a city, as it starts to industrialise, you get more cars. That means there's going to be huge congestion on the roads. And that also leads to the double side effect of when I get more cars on the road, as I see on this left picture, we've got more air pollution. And again, we can associate diseases like lung cancer with the fact that the air quality is way worse. This is a picture of India. There's actually a building in the back there, but you can't see it because it's got this smog, which is where pollution is mixed with fog to create this kind of soup-like kind of air quality. Similar to kind of what we were talking about, not only could people get sicker because they're drinking poor water, which is untreated, but the fact is when we've got more people, doctors, there's less of them per person, hospitals are crowded, which means generally people's life expectancies are going to be lower. Also preventable diseases, which in developed countries might be able to be sorted out, might not be because people might not be able to see a doctor to get it sorted. We've looked at kind of health and housing and waste. One really key thing is the fact is when there is an increase in population, there's more pressure on jobs. And so there's not enough official jobs for people, which means people have to move into the informal sector. We can see a guy on the left here selling food on the street, people on the right shining shoes in Lima in South America. And so these are often poorly paid, they're not as reliable, but it might give these people some income rather than nothing. But we see the rise of informal sector, especially in places where it's urbanising quickly. If there isn't enough jobs, it can also lead to other social problems. So in both these pictures, these are gangs, and this is because these people don't have jobs. They've had to resort to kind of criminal activity to make money. That can be robbing people. That can involve drug trafficking, which is the guys counting out money from selling drugs on the right here. So these are kind of common ways that we might have other social problems caused by the rapid urbanisation. Last thing to consider is, with all of these issues, with that increase in population, we are going to have pressure on resources. So here's an example of a school in a slum, and it's completely overcrowded, which means that school is going to have less chance of these students to have the kind of academic success if they had less of them in a class. Because there's so many people wanting to go to these schools, the schools might be underfunded, not have the resources they need, and so they can't give those students the kind of academic success that they might have. In an even worse scenario, sometimes there is issues in terms of people cannot actually afford to go to the schools because there isn't enough schools, and therefore they might actually have to work. This guy is collecting plastic from a rubbish dump to help support his family. So we can see that there is a huge range of problems, economic, social, environmental, that are caused by the rapid urbanisation of cities.